I wanted to talk to you guys about how the Korean monarchy, I actually think, is more similar to ancient African monarchies, tribalism, than British monarchies and things like that. And this is something right here where I feel like the world needs to relearn. It needs to relearn its history, relearn itself. I told you guys when I studied art history in university, one of my white teachers told me candidly, this curriculum is gonna make you think that Africa is just Egypt and there was nothing else going on in Africa before the Egyptians, before the pharaohs, but that is not true, right? And they're also going to try to lump Egypt with Europe, and that's not true. The Egyptians were African, you know, and so I feel like people forget that Asians were African at one point, okay? It's just because of the ways that migrational patterns happened with our prehistoric ancestors, right? And so actually, when I look at some of my Korean shows, these K-dramas that we just recently talked about, 100 Days My Prince, Empress Ki, The King's Affection, Love in the Moonlight, you know, Rookie Historian. When I look at these shows, and I know I'm not like an excellent, you know, academician on these subjects or anything like this, but I'm learning world travels and stuff like it really interests me. When I look at some of their practices, such as the way that they honor the dead, their sacrifices, when I look at altars and things like that, where they put up maybe imagery of lost loved ones, they put food there. Oftentimes you'll see in Asian homes where there are altars with oranges, you know, there's a certain significance to that. The herbal medicines, these different roles. Something that I find really interesting when you look at K-dramas is every, you know, village or courtier role has an outfit, you know, and my husband, sometimes when I watch these shows, he's like, why do they always wear the same thing? And I'm like, that's because certain roles have certain costumes, you know, customary costumes that they need to wear. And so the ministers wear certain things. The academicians, you know, the historians wear a certain things. The chambermaids wear a certain things. The prince, the crown prince, and the actual other princes, the ones who are not the crown prince, they wear a certain thing. The crown princess wears a certain thing. So it's, and even the lower classes, you know, you can see the caste systems in these things as well. When you go and look at Nollywood films, for instance, I saw a Nollywood film recently called The Beautiful Village Dancer, I think it was called. And when you look at the tribalism of Africa that existed before colonialism, how basically if you had, there really weren't countries back then. That countries really were developed with colonialism. But if you look at how there were regions, you know, and in these regions you had this like village, and you would, in the village you would have basically like a village government, right? And you would often also have like a village king. There would be like a king of that village. You look at goryeo, okay? If you look at goryeo, which was before joseon, which goryeo I think is between the dates, and you guys correct me if I have any of you guys on my channel who know more about Korean history, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that goryeo was essentially the Middle Ages, right? That's basically the European version of the Middle Ages. And then joseon was essentially the European version of the Great Enlightenment, right? So, you know, the predecessor to the Korean version of the Great Enlightenment would have been around the Middle Ages. And so at that time, you would have had these little feeder, these little satellite kings in each of their villages. And that's exactly how it was in Africa. If you look at the Ghana Empire, if you look at the Mali Empire, if you look at the Nigerians before colonialism, this is really how it went before that. You had these districts sort of governed by a body that was, you know, limited to certain regions, and you would have like a king. You would have like a king. And within that, you would have these different classes, these castes, but it just wasn't to the extent that the British monarchy had these kind of lepers. And often what you also see in ancient Hindu times, you know, in ancient India, where you had these lepers, you know, these castaways. You didn't really have that in Africa. Something I also find that you see in Korean, when I look at these K-dramas and you look at the Korean monarchies, you also see these, in African history, I think it's Swahili, you call them domas and jollies. I think it's Swahili, don't quote me on that. But these were the elders. You know, if you look at some of these Nollywood films, you'll see them. They just are like speaking gibberish, and like, you know, they consult with the gods. Same thing. You see the exact same thing in K-dramas. Now, I know in British history, for example, Princess Diana had her royal astrologer, for example. You might find that. But all of these, essentially just to say, all of these practices really come from Africa. And I know there's a lot of people who really don't want to hear that, but it's just the truth. You have to really relearn. You know, the first boats that traveled across large bodies of land were in Africa. You know, there's proof that shows that Africans were in South America. They were in Asia long before the Europeans ever arrived there. It's because we come from a common ancestor, and that common ancestor was born in Africa. It's just science, you know, look it up. But something else that I noticed that I thought was really interesting in K-dramas and things like that is that you will have sort of like the village psychic or whatever. And I think that right there comes straight from Africa. Another thing is, this is a little bit off subject, but in the Aztec, you know, in the Aztec tradition, where you see these ancient Aztec pyramids, why are you seeing pyramids, something that was really, you know, attached with Africa? Why are you seeing those in Latin America? You know, it all comes back to Africa. So that was just something that I thought was really interesting. I think that the monarchies of Asia, of Africa are closer than you would think, and you can also relate these to other things in South America, even, for example, if you would think, or even for example, just a little bit of you know, mystery, a little bit of educational intrigue. Why do, you know, Pacific Islanders kind of look like Koreans, kind of look like Chinese people? You know, if you ever watched that show, Hawaii Five-0, you know, you would see people on there who were actually, their ethnicity was Chinese, was Japanese, but they passed for native Hawaiians. So why is that? It's because we've been migrating for a very, very long time, but we all came out of Africa. But anyway, I would love to know what you guys think on that. Let me know in the comments. And again, if you're new here, hit that like, subscribe button, hit the bell so you know whenever I post video. Send me a super thanks, send me a super chat, help push this video into the algorithm.